I've been trying to almost save some of the frowned upon old school PT exercise like I's, Y's, and T's, or the traditional rotator cuff ones. If I can find a range with, let's just say, external rotation, controlled ER, where they do feel that posterior rotator cuff, the back of their shoulder, and they can perceive an exertion there, and they're just doing the last 15 degrees of ER over and over, I think that's a win. So that they're just getting a bunch of blood exertion and they are perceiving a particular area. That's the whole thing with any exercise, really. You can get these very cool, awesome itoportal flow exercises on the ground. But specifically in clinic, or if you're trying to change the way that your body looks or works, you need to perceive it in a specific area and you need to perceive it exerting. And then I believe with the last place you're kind of talking about is going to that upper limit. That's how I kind of perceive a change happening.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I like that. I think I don't want to misconstrue the idea that if you have shoulder pain and you're typically somebody that does bench press all the time, that you should increase your RPE in a sense on bench press. I mean, think more locally, or in the suburbs of that area, right? If you have a elbow pain, think arm, and and focus on some local stuff. That's why I rarely, it's funny because sometimes I think sometimes make fun of like clams, or we make fun of IR and ER banded stuff, and that's usually because people just throw them at everyone. But there is a use for those things. Sometimes we just need load in the tissue and volume, and then we get tissue adaptation, and that adaptation allows you to handle a new level of load, and that makes pain go away. Okay. But if you're getting some joint pinching pain or sharp pain, you have to clear that out first before you can do it. So that's where, we're talking mainly to clinicians here. So this should be easy to understand. If you have this closing pinchy pain, that's something that you have to educate the patient. Like, we can't go into that range yet until we clear that out.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, let's still train that shoulder a ton in any range that we can without sharp or serious, discomfort.
There
Right?
is something you taught, any range you can. I want to go a little bit further into that. You were talking about a possible Instagram post. Follow us on Instagram. Tell your friends. But to explain that, so like I had mentioned maybe I was doing an exercise and I felt really, it was the same targeted muscle group. I was talking about my biceps. And I was working my biceps like this, and I worked my biceps like in a different angle, basically, but the same bicep, and I was completely weaker. What was your idea about kind of training through ranges of motion? Because I think that's a great example of what you were talking about, the tricep one.
The tricep one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the discrepancy. Well, you were telling me that often the way you like to train is to find your weakness,
Right.
which I think is counterintuitive. And actually, what most people don't do, they train their strength.
Mm.
You don't usually like to bench if you're a terrible bench presser, because it's just not really that rewarding, to be honest. So people tend to just overdo their strengths. But what I was saying was, like, there's been times where myself, or I've noticed it in others, who can maybe bench 350 pounds, but doing one dip was painful. And it just means that you're kind of playing with fire there, because it means your shoulder and elbows and all your triceps and your pectoralis muscles and all these muscles that are really contracting can only do it in a certain way. And if you play with that range at all, it can be catastrophic. So this is where you get pec tears and tricep tears and these things. I mean, if somebody can bench 315 for reps, but they have a problem doing dips without pain, elbow pain, pec pain, I think it's just a matter of time before you tear something, because it's telling me that the amount of tightness, the amount of directionality that your body works in is so specific to a certain task that you don't have any variability. And it's variability that creates athleticism. So if you can, what you want to do is I was mentioning doing tricep work in shoulder extension, in shoulder anatomic position, and in shoulder flexion. So for example, if you wanted to do triceps in shoulder extension, you could do dips, You could do hands back on a bench, body weighted dips, or plates on your thighs if you want. You could do like kneeling or like knee on a bench, tricep kickbacks. If you want to do neutral grip, you just think, or neutral shoulder, you just think tricep pull downs, just standing there like a cable. And then if you want to do something where shoulder flexion, you can think overhead cable tricep extensions, or a French press where you're on your back. You're on your back and you're, like a skull crusher. Yeah. Exactly. French press just means with like a preacher curl bar, I think.
Right.
So, and being able to create power or speed too. Speed is actually, I don't really want to change the topic of this podcast episode, but being able to generate power and also speed. And sometimes you can do one and you can't do the other. And that's also sketchy because it means maybe creating a fast contraction is not something that your body's used to. And that can cause an injury, or also load itself. So being able to create speed or power from all different positions is a pretty good sign of some shoulder health, or tricep health or muscle health.
For sure. No, I love that idea. And I was just saying how I've been also trying to give some of that tricep work, either triceps in extension, triceps through neutral or overhead and deflection, specifically with elbows. I find elbows can be a little tricky to fix. However, if we can get a tricep to start working, and then I was using these kind of, again, back to my ER idea of like end range stuff, just some kind of some minimal 15 degrees up and down flexion extension, just pumping some blood, just getting some tension into that elbow in a safe way to, like you said, kind of create that adaptation.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, the FR guys, they're all about, training in these 15-degree ranges because your body can kind of hold strength or adaptation in 15-degree increments of strength. So, you can train the body in 15-degree movement patterns, at least, so you train it at 60 degrees and you train it at 75 and at 90, and so there's there's different ways that you're talking about it. But I mean, just being able to apply directionality in different positions is probably smart.
There was one other thing I think to kind of cover this, but you were talking about where pain happens, how pain happens. You were kind of talking about low backs, I think. You're talking about people that don't really move in a particular way. Like, I was just thinking of someone with low back pain and kind of standing all day. Like, I have a nurse that stands and works at her nurse station, and she goes home and, stands and cooks. And that's just a nightmare for her back. And we introduced a little bit of spinal flexion and gave her kind of some strength and some ranges, but her range of pain basically is upright. Like, the low back is really not moving forward and back. I mean, if it goes 15 degrees, that's a lot during the course of her day. She's mostly only standing. What were you were kind of talking about? You think that, I'll let you finish it, but you think that pain kind of happens in areas where a lot of range doesn't occur?
Remember,
because we've talked about
the last time I think I said something like, there's no such thing as bad posture. There's just postures that you're stuck in or that you can't get out of. But I would say it's usually, again, it's a bell curve, and you could say there's issues usually with people on the left side where there's no movement, there's no segmentation of the spine, or there's people on the right side where there's too much movement. And depending upon the joint in the body, it'll give you different, so probably for low backs, it's more of the left side of the curve, right? Often you can have basically, the spine, I think Stuart McGill calls these hinges or hinge points. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this before.
Check out the hinges episode.
You'll have 3 or 4 segments that really don't segment or dissociate from each other. And then you'll have one segment that moves a ton. And often at these hinge points, you'll find issues. So it could hurt in the stiff area, it could hurt in the hinge points. But the point is that you have a bunch of stiff segments followed by a hinging segment. If you fix that, it'll fix all the issues. So it doesn't really matter, where the pain is. That's why I said I can tell people I don't always know where your pain is going to be. It's kind of irrelevant sometimes where the pain is. Not always, but sometimes.
Is this, and I want to do an episode on this, but we'll wrap this up here, but is this where the argument, movements over muscles, because I was thinking about that, muscles versus movements over muscles, and I think it gets distorted pretty quickly. But I think there are some of those 15-degree steps you can kind of go in terms of it. Like I was thinking about your pec guy, your guy that's doing a bench press. He could bench press 315 for reps, but then can't do a dip without a lot of strain. It just doesn't make sense. Clearly, he has worked one specific movement, the bench press movement, and a very specific set of muscles through that movement. But those muscles don't then translate to a different movement. So in the bench press one, the movement and muscles are one. When he switches over to the dip, then those muscles can't do the movement.
Or without pain. Yeah.
Or versus the pain, correct.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying as well? Or so what is the difference between the movement versus the muscle, or the muscle versus the movement in this sense? Because I think a lot of times we're getting confused with the work and the movement. People are like, never do those stupid post rotator cuff ones.
I think it's just an issue of positionality. Like, so there's just position and there's total joint capacity. So,
okay, I like that. You
know what I mean? So these guys that have been benching for years, they know exactly how to set their shoulders, how to bend the bar, how to keep, and then they don't even have to have their elbows tracking in the same width from their thorax. They'll have their own custom position that each shoulder's in, and that's fine. And they groove that pattern, and they can get away with that pattern usually, and sometimes it breaks. But that's, and then you go put the shoulder in a different position where maybe you need more IR of the shoulder, or you need more ER of the shoulder, or the elbow joint, or at the wrists. And then now the chain doesn't pull right, because you have joints that are not working together, right? You don't have the capacity of each joint, from your fingers to your wrist to your elbow to your shoulder to your thorax. It doesn't allow those things to synergistically work together to create a power without an issue. Sure. And I mean, not to put you on the spot, and of course I have the right answer, but when I think of elbow pain, typically what part of the body do you think is connected to the reason why most people have elbow issues? Do you think it's the elbow?
Do I think the elbow is the reason for elbow issues? Rarely.
What did you? Okay, so I'll give you multiple choice. Okay. So is it the elbow? Is it the shoulder? Is it the big toe? Or is it the thorax?
See, I like to say the thorax because that was a very special episode to me recently, and you should go listen to it. But okay, but how? Help me. How does the thorax relate to my elbow?
It is thorax.
Yes.
The point is, if you're doing barbell curls, and we're a little off topic already, but it's great.
I know.
If you're doing barbell curls and your thorax is, let's say, rotated to the right, or it's positioned to the right, just for an example, you rotate better right, everything is easier to the right. It's oriented to the right. It's going to be a lot easier for you to supinate that arm. Okay. So if you're trying to supinate your other arm, you're going to have a lot of stress going through your elbow compared to the other side. So that's what I'm only using it as an example to say your thorax, in my opinion, dictates most issues with elbows, because elbows don't have as much freedom of movement as a shoulder does. Shoulders can compensate like crazy.
Right.
But elbows really don't compensate that well. It's kind of like knees. They're mainly hinge joints. They have some rotational aspects, of course, but elbows don't handle a lot of that shear or rotational force very well. Sure. And those muscles that attach there, if they're not used to that type of force, they don't really like it either. So my point being is that the position of the shoulder, the position of these joints, if they're not able to comfortably get into a position and fire, you're going to have issues, right? Going back to the bencher doing dips, or for the person doing barbell curls, they can maybe do hammer curls just fine, or they can do single, dumbbell in each hand. They can do supinated curls, but then as soon as you lock them into a bar, now you have to have good symmetry in your body to be good. This is why fixing people's, uneven hips or asymmetrical hip issues usually aren't fixed very well by a barbell squat, 2 feet on the ground.
Sure.
Or, if you want to fix shoulders and pecs, it's probably not great to fix them to a bar and a bench press, because you're not able to dissociate anything. Now you got to have symmetry. Otherwise you're going to be, in trouble.
I fully agree. You sent me one quick thing, and then I'm bringing it back to RPE, and then we can finish. You sent me an awesome post the other day about gait. And a fellow was talking about when the foot hits the ground and the myth of adduction at the leg, and how as soon as your foot hits the ground, you get adduction of the leg. You don't need to work. Anyways, it was a whole post. However, the gist of the post was that there is a natural order of how things work through the gait cycle. There is this series of things. If you want a good example of it, and we'll get him back on slowly, is the sports physio, Zach, talks about these chains of muscles really, really well, and all the things that kind of fire together. And his exercises kind of reflect that. With the elbows, my friend Zach Couples taught me one time, that he got from another course, but that supination, I'm going to mess it up, but like you can feel if you pronate one arm and supinate the other, that your rib cage will also kind of follow, right? So like pronation on the right and supination on the left would cause left side bending and right opening, right? Adduction on the right, and vice versa. If you were to turn, you can just do it right now as you're listening, not in the car, but if you're turning your right arm into, anyways, dear God, I'm brain farting hard.
If you supinate your right arm,
yes,
your chest should follow it, right?
Correct.
As you're pronating your left hand.
You'd be rotating to the right or side bending to the right. Anyways, these things go together naturally. However, what happens through some of these pain cycles is that we have rewired a certain movement for a particular adaptation. Like my nurse at the desk, she's always reaching off to the right to grab the phone. And so she's just got this new movement pattern that may not mimic her pronation, supination, interrotation, and abduction of that corresponding thorax. And so she could get a break in that pattern and create a new kind of torque. Now, going back to the kind of gait thing, we resync that stuff up. The Zach Kogans of the world try to start off that initial thing. However, if you don't want to mimic gait all day, you can go back to RPE. You can think about perceived exertion, find the tissue that has a maladapted. And I also want to make an argument for maladaptation. Their body, there is no such thing. The body is just trying to protect itself. It's actually a good adaptation. It just functionally means in relation to something else, just doesn't fit. So now that she's reaching for the phone on the right, the outside of her elbow is hurting. That doesn't mix when she's trying to cut carrots at the end of the day to feed her family, right? So I now need to put a new novel, non-painful stimulus into her elbow in relation to her shoulder and a grip. And I can kind of think about that now in terms of RPE, where we can put some good positive load into that arm and tell the elbow, yo, it's okay to move. It's okay to cut carrots. It's okay to grab the phone at work. But we need to put a new novel stimulus in there and move the needle so that we get a change in the stimulus.